So we left off on 6:14, and Mordecai was being honored by the king for saving his life, and Haman had to parade him around town and honor him, and that made him mad because Mordecai is a Jew, and Haman is trying to destroy all of the Jews, including Mordecai, and because of Mordecai, because he thought Mordecai had disrespected him, so he was going to wipe out all the Jews, right? So here we are. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to banquet with Esther and prepared. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is the request up to half the kingdom? It shall be done." Excuse me. Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people at that request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. The king said, "Will he also assault my queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbano, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So the very gallows that he made for Mordecai, he was going to be hung on. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So she had told him he was her uncle. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in their sight, then the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing to his eyes. Let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, an Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in the king's provinces." So she was asking him to not annihilate the Jews, to take it back. "For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen?" The king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews." You yourself write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever it is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. So he told Mordecai to write a letter saying that they revoke that order and to do it in his name. So the king's scribes were called at the time in the 3rd month, which is in the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all the Mordecai commanded in the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes and the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote to the name of the king Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses bred from swift steeds. By these letters the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children, women, and to plunder their possessions. So they were allowed to defend themselves if anybody came against them, so the Jews would survive. On the day, all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all the people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the Jews had to be ready to fight anybody that was coming against them, and they were allowed to by the king. They were allowed to defend themselves if anybody came against them. The couriers who rode on a royal horse went out, hastened, and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan on the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in a royal apparel, in blue and white, with a great crown of gold and garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced, and it was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king commanded and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness at a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On that day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, and the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. So the Jews overcame their enemies, and they won. Hallelujah. The Jews gathered together in the cities throughout all of the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all of the officials of the provinces, satraps and governors, and all of the doing the king's work helped the Jews become. The fear of Mordecai fell upon them. So I'm not going to finish reading the rest of the story, but it's an amazing story, so I would suggest that you go and finish reading it. But it was a great story. Esther was so brave. She was awesomely brave. She could have just kept her mouth shut, and all of the Jews would have been killed. But she was so brave. She knew that if she talked to the king, there was a chance that she could get killed too. But her bravery not only saved herself, her uncle, but all of the Jews. And the Jews were able to overtake all of their enemies, all because of her bravery. I thought it was an amazing story. And there's more to it. There's another, the 9 and 10. And it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. Read it. Finish reading it. You'll love it. God bless you.